Hello, this is Rama Lakshmi, and welcome to the Print's Page Turner. I'm here today to talk about a stunning new book. It's called The Caste Consensus, and the author is public intellectuals, human rights defender, and anti-caste scholar Anand Teltumbde. The, the most provocative central argument of this book is that the caste census is a con. That's what Anand is calling it. Anand, at a time when there is a political consensus, intellectual consensus around caste census, the issue of caste census in India, you have sort of set the cat among the pigeons by calling it a con. You're saying that it has always been a con, and somehow everybody has drunk from the Kool-Aid. Can you explain why you're so distrustful of the caste census?
You see, caste census is gone because there's a wide consensus about it that it is good, as if it is a universal good, you know. So it is actually not. What does caste census do? It actually would bring in data as to which community stays where, or meaning what is their educational status, what is their economic status, and so on and so forth. That is something like a diagnostic snapshot, you could say. But what do you do with that snapshot? Professor Satish Deshpande, for instance, used the word, there is a selfie of ourselves. But what do you do with selfie? That is the bigger question, because that such kind of things would always be there. But in order to do something like how to use that data and formulate a policy, you have to have a political will. That is the $1 million question. So will there be a political will there?
So you're saying the political will is lacking. How does one develop this political will to take the findings of the caste census forward to make sure it has a meaningful outcome?
Because some such measures, like caste census, etc., gain something like a popular agreement. So that is what is dangerous. People should problematize it because initially itself, so that such kind of political will could be forced in the ruling classes.
Let's go back to the past. In the book, you begin with how the British used the census operation as a tool, as an instrument of colonial control, and especially caste census. And you said they, instead of the goal of annihilating caste, what they did was they froze caste into rigid prisons, into rigid categories, and from which India could not escape. And in fact, independent India unthinkingly, lazily just inherited many of those British categories, which were meant for some other purpose, some other goal of colonial control. But in the name of welfareism, independent India just inherited it. Did independent India have any other choice? What could it have done differently?
Yeah, it is unreasonable to expect colonial powers to annihilate caste. Yeah. But India, when it became independent, they had before them to develop India as a project. They made lots of promises during freedom struggle, and India had a option there at that moment to abolish caste itself. As a matter of fact, when constitution was being written, that time they abolished untouchability. Untouchability was being spoken against by all kinds of upper caste reformers, epitomized by Mahatma Gandhi, none other than Mahatma Gandhi. So there's a simple question, it should occur to anyone, that how could untouchability be abolished when caste survives? And it is not that it was not raised in the Constituent Assembly. One, Pratham Thakur, he was a grandson of Harishchandra Thakur, who was one of the first to do something like an anti-caste movement in the form of Matua sect, because that time the expression was always a sort of quasi-religious. He raised this precise question, that how can you abolish untouchability when you are allowing caste to survive? And two gentlemen from upper caste, from West Bengal, from Bengal those days, not United Bengal, So they supported him. They were the upper caste people, and Bengal is the land where this intense touch me notism is not practiced. But rest of the Indian scheduled caste and everybody actually kept quiet. So that reveals what was cooking in the Constituent Assembly itself. They let the caste survive. There was no discussion at all, and their argument was totally ignored.
Um, See, when the British were conducting these census, they were also coming out of the Enlightenment era when they were approaching the colonies through the prism of knowledge. Let's understand the societies we are studying. Enlightenment era spawned a whole lot of enterprises on cataloging, archiving, classification, counting. So ethnographies were produced, flora, fauna, what kind of people lived here, what kind of food they ate. So there was a lot of those kinds of enterprises. So can we look at the caste census that the British conducted through the Enlightenment prism, or do we have to ascribe that a different motive to it?
Yeah, you are not incorrect. The Enlightenment brings in all these kinds of things and appreciation and measurement and floras and faunas, etc. were done. But with regard to caste, it was not a thing. Like it's not cynically done. It was very, very by design. They actually planned it. 1857 revolt when happened, British actually took a shock, and they realized that they did not know India enough. And there was a need to understand Indian things, Indian society, etc. And they sent a battery of anthropologists, anthropomorphic teams, etc., and enumerators, and systematically documented everything. Now, this is not a matter of conjecture. It is very, very well documented. And there are lots of huge literature on this, that how this entire kind of thinking circulated to the British policymakers. So this is not a uh, enlightenment kind of continuation, but it is a very, very uh, planned kind of measure that they wanted to take in order to govern India effectively.
Mhm, mhm. You also mention in the book, and that was very interesting, that many caste groups mobilized themselves and organized themselves, and a lot of caste-based associations, community associations were formed around that time because they petitioned, lobbied the British powers for a certain kind of classification. Oftentimes, they wanted the upward classification. So a lot of them, trace their lineage back to the rishis and chanting practices to say we're actually there. We're not down there in the ladder, but we're actually somewhere around the top or top layer. How different is the response, do you think, right now? Uh, is it any different the way people are responding to this enterprise now?
The responses would not be any different from what happened 150 years ago. So it would be all the dynamics of caste is very similar. That is the interesting part of it. So because of the census, the boundaries of caste were rigidified and people were compelled to identify with caste, which was to be very fluid kind of thing and very contextual. But they're gone, and the plus of it is that the pan India kind of caste identification was made, and it led to formation of associations which in their own ways actually fought caste or caste discrimination, etc. There were certain positives about it, but it strengthened the caste consciousness. It strengthened the consciousness across the board, and that became a very salient force, and which was to be used by the rulers. So this is the dynamics needs to be understood.
In fact, you ask a very interesting question in the book about the idea, the notion of modernity. And you say if India didn't encounter modernity through the British colonial system, instead it had encountered modernity through industrialization, like many Western powers, how would caste have been different today? How would the whole shape of modernity have been different today? Can you expand on that? What are these two encounters of modernity? What are you speculating?
The colonial modernity was restricted to extractive industries, So they wanted to extract mineral wealth from India and take it to England for processing and bring the finished products out here for Indian market. So this was the process, and they created in that process a computer network of Indians, which would actually help this process. So there were actually network of merchants, etc., etc., which and bankers and things, so on and so forth, But it actually did not percolate. If they had really done the industrialization here, hmm, so that would have democratized something like it could have created the class of workers, working class. It could have created innovators. It could have created many more things and democratized the production kinds of relations, which did not happen. So, and that would have impacted even the caste per se. Marx, when railway network was coming in India, that time Marx said that with the railway network, there would be industry set up and which would actually weaken the caste system, which had a monstrous hold over its development. So this is the process actually, but it did not happen. Railway network came, but just to haul the raw materials to England. And beyond that, the processing did not take place in India. So that kind of modernity, the industrial kind of modernity, did not take place in the country.
Coming back to the present, you say it's almost fashionable for India's progressive community, progressive intellectuals, to support the caste census. Can they afford to oppose it? Can anyone today afford to oppose the caste census, especially if they are from the Savarna caste? Will they not be accused of being caste blind? Is that why there is a
I
consensus?
see it has become a stereotype, whenever a caste is uttered by anyone, the progressive section jumps onto it. Okay. They understand it that, oh, this is something like a, uh, if we do not support it, lest we be considered as something like anti-Dalit or anti kind of low caste. So that kind of tendency is quite visible. They do not go into what is going to happen to this uh, lower caste segment or whatever it is, in whose interest it is, that is not seen. So this is very superficial. Even in the mainstream, mainstream scholarship, there is a lot of misunderstanding about caste. See, caste is such a category. It is like amoeba. It only knows splitting. So it cannot be used as a category to base any struggle for radical transformation. That that should be borne in mind. Though the only solution possible for the caste question is the annihilation of caste and nothing else. And if you agree with this formulation, then it comes that the caste census, etc., would not be beneficial for the people who suffer caste. Okay, caste census should only, as it has happened in the past, would strengthen their caste consciousness, and there would be something like casteization. We have really experienced this thing happening, so there is nothing like hypothetical about it.
And in fact, you say caste-based reservations actually solidified castes. They did not move towards annihilation. But was an affirmative action the first step toward creating a level playing field, which will eventually go on to annihilation? How could you move from caste to annihilation without going through a level playing field?
Reservation does not bring in playing field. The way the policy is formulated actually accrues the initial advantage, to some people who were already better off among the scheduled caste. Okay. Because there is a basic dichotomy, moreover, that reservation actually benefits an individual. At the most, his nuclear family, not even siblings, also, not a parent family, but it's counted against caste. This dichotomy does not bring in equality at all. The subcategorization, demand, etc., stemmed from this issue. So instead of patching this up, they actually start jumping over the caste enumeration, meaning doing the wrong things again and again. Okay, more of the wrongs. So reservation, as a matter of fact, is no leveler, and it cannot succeed unless there is something like a datum of capacity building created across the uh, people. So that universal kind of measures of provisioning the capacity in building ingredients like universal education to all, healthcare to all, livelihood security to all through land reforms and job provisions. Reservation for us as a special kind of measure is not going to succeed. And again, the experience testifies to that fact.
And now that we're talking about reservation, you in your book have predicted three outcomes of the caste census. One, there will be a demand for subcategorization. Two, there will be a demand to break the ceiling cap of 50%. Three, eventually, you predict that it'll all be dismantled. Caste-based reservation will be dismantled, and EWS-based reservation is the only system that will stay. Three outcomes you're predicting. What is the basis of these three?
Yeah, it's the first one, like this cost census would entail subcategorization demand is very clear because it doesn't serve any other purpose than that. Even those people who have been demanding, जिसकी संख्या जितनी जिसकी संख्या भारी उतनी उनकी भागीदारी. Bhagidari in what? The question remains is bhagidari in what? Do they want the representation in legislatures? Do they want representation in uh, reservations in government or PSU jobs, which has been eroding over the last 30 years? So these are the basic questions. So subcategorization is not going to solve the problem ever because although Supreme Court now blessed it, but subcategorization is a combinatorial kind of grouping of a caste. Again, that group, there will be resurfacing. The inequality cannot be done away with as long as this policy is operated. So that is out of question. Okay. Second thing is cap. Now, within this framework of reservation, which I am not very enamored with, the 50% reservation is actually, it sounds very arbitrary. Supreme Court also did not have a very rational kinds of backing that kind of 50% ceiling. Now, it could have been much better rather having something like an arbitrary ceiling. They could have just done it this way that if there are upper caste, general caste, etc., 15% or 20% or whatever. So give them the reservation and rest of the thing could be open to everybody. That would have been much neater solution and cogent solution. But they will not do that. They want caste to be sort of alive and so that all the caste cauldron could be kept boiling because there would be lots of debate, lots of discourses on such kind of nonsensical thing. And the third thing, what I propose, that ultimately, because BJP fought tooth and nail against this kind of thing, 2021, they gave a Supreme affidavit to before Supreme Court that it's a government conscious policy not to include caste in the next census. Okay, they reiterated during 24 election. Prime Minister Modi actually termed it as an urban Naxal demand. This caste census demand was an urban Naxal demand for him and was to be nationally opposed. But all of a sudden, in April last, they had a volte-face and started sort of took a decision that caste census would be included. Momentarily, everybody understand the Bihar election was the context. That was a context, and even the 24 election results also were the context because the lower strata of OBCs were was seen as a more durable kind of constituency for BJP, and upper strata was not reliable. They actually drifted away because upper strata of OBC is educated and they can read through the BJP tactics, but lower strata could be very, very kind of loyal to them and could be very durable in their power game. So these were the calculations. But ultimately, the larger goal, because BJP is very shrewd and strategic party, so they have been driving everything towards the larger goal of their parent. And the parent's larger goal was abolishing the caste-based reservations. So it would come handy. How does it come handy? Because caste census will produce the data and would show that every caste has that kind of inequality, etc. Okay, if you take something like a very scientific measure, Gini coefficients, etc. My guess is that this Gini coefficient would be all across similar. So the argument becomes that why these caste-based reservations are not produced? They actually failed. So why not have the economic basis for the reservation? And seeding was already done in the form of EWS. So this is going to be their agenda.
Essentially, what you're saying in your book then is caste is a problem, but caste census is masquerading as a solution, but it's actually another problem.
Absolutely. I want to say that, yeah. That caste census is no solution. Caste census is going to strengthen the caste consciousness. It is going to castize society further because they're already casteized. They say that in Manu's times or some ancient times, etc., castes were very kind of intensely practiced. India was, meaning lower caste had a very bad system. I would say that India was never casteized before as it today. So, and the credit of that should go to these kinds of policies of so-called social justice and all.
But now that India has started out on this bandwagon of caste census and it doesn't look like it can be reversed, what are the solutions for?
And no policy BJP decides can be reversed. That is the fact. No policy Prime Minister Modi decides is getting reversed, and it would be impossible to reverse. But all the same, we'll have to keep on saying right things, not get thrown into wrongs.
Great. Thank you so much, Anand. This is a really provocative book, and your arguments are going to stun a lot of readers. Thank you for this conversation and joining The Print.
Thank you so much. Thank you.